Whoops. Anyway, so what do you think? Like, I don't know what to do. Do I
Okay.
call, say, so reason
Board
why?
members, we're getting close. I'm just waiting for 2 more board members to come on and we'll be ready to get started.
You sure? Are you in there? Huh? Are you up?
I think so.
Can you see you?
I can see me.
Okay. I had
We can see Brian, we can hear him.
See, good thing I don't talk bad about anybody. Huh?
That's right, Brian. Keep it on the up and up.
I try.
And try to just give you a hint that we're there.
Okay, board members, appreciate you joining us. This is we're convening the Royse City RDA board meeting for April 6th, 2021. Time is 6:32. I'd like to recognize that we do have board member Saxton, board member Paul, board member Wilson, board member Jackson, and board member Burrell with us today. I'd like to just read a statement, if you don't mind. I, Executive Director of the RDA Board, in accordance with Utah Code Section 52-3-207-4, have determined that conducting a meeting in the Royse City Council chambers presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who would be present at the City Council chambers. The basis of this determination is due to the infectious nature of the potentially dangerous health effects of contracting the COVID-19 virus. There is not sufficient space in the council chambers to provide appropriate safe physical distancing for the safety of individuals who attend. Accordingly, then, on this date, April 6, 2021, at 6:33, okay, this meeting will be held electronically without an anchor location. Okay, so with that, we do have one consent item. It's the approval of the March 2nd, 2021 Royse City RDA meeting minutes. Board members, any comments or questions about those minutes? Okay, hearing none. Then do I have a motion then to approve the consent items?
I move to
Okay,
approve the consent items.
thank you, Diane. Do I have a second?
I'll
Second.
second it.
Okay, and I've got a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Hearing none, okay, those minutes are approved. We do have a couple of discussion items we're going to walk through, so we'll turn some time over to Randy to walk through some of these. The first one will be as a review of a draft resolution establishing a policy for the sale of RDA-owned property. Let me make this clear. We're not going to approve that resolution tonight. This is simply a discussion about what's in that selling of RDA-owned property and get your comments on that. So with that, Randy, go ahead. You need to come off mute.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There you go. Thank you, Randy.
Mr. Chair, members of the board. The task that was given to us was that we wanted to draft a policy in the event the RDA does go out and purchases any property. This was discussed about the potential that might arise down the road with property that might be accessed from the proposed 5600 South interchange and 1900 West project. There could be some excess property that might be available, and the potential might be there for the RDA to purchase. And so we're going to have two policies. One will be what we go through to purchase property, and then one will be on the sell. This one tonight is on the sell of the property. Basically, what we want to start with is to state that the redevelopment statute gives the redevelopment agency the authority, it's found in 17C1-202, that we can buy, obtain, by option, acquire by gift, or otherwise acquire any interest to real or personal property. So the statute basically gives us that authority to do it. So property could be given to us. We could put an option on it. We can go out and buy it, or any other option that there might be available to acquire property. So we do have that authority under the statute. What we've got here is basically this policy deals with about 4 or 5 issues. The first one is that we have in this resolution that any sale of property has to be approved by the agency board. So we would need to come to the board, get your approval, and we've also indicated that it has to be by an agreement. That way there's a public document that you will vote on in a public meeting that will be available, that will give the transparency of whatever actions we take. The second thing we have in here, we put in a provision just to clarify that we do have the right to sell or donate real property that we've acquired to any government entity for specific projects, right-of-ways, or anything that wouldn't conflict with the Redevelopment Act. The third thing is we've kind of outlined two process, if you will, that we could sell our property. The first one would be by a competitive market, which we would go through a request for proposal, and we would put an RFP, and we would put that out and publicize that. And then we would get bids or individuals that would be responsive to that. And then we've included that in that RFP that the individual or business or developer or whatever it is that we would select basically has to meet certain guidelines. And we've outlined those through A through D. We need to make sure that whatever they do is going to conform with the redevelopment project area plan that was adopted for that project area. We want to make sure that the design quality of the proposed development will meet what the agency board wants to have. This is, as we talked about when we were talking about the Chapter 13 code, this gives you the opportunity as a public body to review any development being proposed on any property that we would sell to determine if it meets your standards. That we would have to know that the developer has the expertise, or the buyer has the expertise to develop the property, and they can do it in a timely manner. And we want to make sure they have the financing available to do it. And then we have the right to establish any covenants or restrictions that we might feel are necessary to ensure that the development goes as planned. So that would be one process. The other process that we've outlined in here is we've outlined that we do have the right to exclusively negotiate the sale of property. It was suggested by the Economic Development Committee today that we might want to put some actual provisions in of what would constitute us to do an exclusive negotiation. And so some of the suggestions that have been thrown out, or I'm recommending that we would add to this section, would be that we would have the right to exclusively negotiate if the property is landlocked, meaning there's nobody that's going to be able to buy it other than maybe an adjoining property owner. That we could sell it to an adjoining property owner if the owner can show us that they have a proposal to develop it and that development meets our project area plan that was adopted. We could also do it, sell it to a nonprofit or a government entity for community or public purpose. We could also exclusively negotiate if we did put the property out for a competitive bid or an RFP, but we did not get any proposals. Then we have the right to determine whether or not it makes sense to exclusively negotiate. And then the other thing is that we would have the right to exchange the property perhaps for other benefit if it facilitates our development plans or our project area plans. So the exclusive negotiation can happen, but it has certain requirements or a requirement that would have to be met for us to go outside of that competitive bidding process. The last thing it does is it basically says that we will sell property at fair market value. Would be established by a qualified appraiser that we would hire or approve. But we do want to put a provision in here because the statute allows us. We could also sell it below market value if there are certain conditions that have been met and the redevelopment agency board approves that. And we come back with you with our findings of why we want to sell it below fair market value. So that's basically what this policy does. We propose that it be adopted by resolution. And if there's no other specific changes or comments or additions that the board would have, we would implement into the final draft those specific things I just outlined for exclusive negotiation. And then we'd bring this back to the board for formal approval.
Okay, Diane, go ahead.
Thank you for expanding point 4, because that was my area of biggest concern as well. So I think adding those would be helpful. And I was just wondering, what would motivate us as an RDA to purchase land versus the city purchasing land? And I don't know if that's just a fundamental, budget sort of issue, or if there are, so it's more of a principal question.
Okay, let me address that. I don't think there's anything that would stop the city from buying a piece of property and from doing that. The reason the RDA would be interested is because particularly the property we're looking at would be in our redevelopment project areas. And I think we have a better opportunity to negotiate with particularly the state, because the goal would be that if we bought it, we'd buy it for an economic development purposes, and we would kind of control that. I also think the redevelopment statute gives us more latitude on the prices that we can pay. We can have the right to negotiate things down where it might be a little bit more difficult for the city to do that. So the policy that we've adopted would be one for when the RDA gets involved in purchase of property. The city would operate under a separate policy, or they could take this same policy and adopt it as a city policy. But again, remember, the redevelopment agency is a separate independent entity of the city. So that's why we have the right to create our own policies and procedures. And sometimes they may be the same as the city. Sometimes they might be a little different, but that's really the reason why we're coming to you with this, because we believe we would like to approach UDOT and say, hey, give the redevelopment agency the first right to negotiate with any property that might be available.
I'd certainly like to review the document with those additions you have, before we decide to.
Yeah, I'll get these fixed done this next week. And I think our goal was, if I remember right, Mayor, I think we were trying to have at least an RDA meeting on the 20th. And if we did, we would have these ready for you to adopt at that point in time.
So what if we're both interested in the same piece of property? Who gets president over that?
The city or the RDA?
Yeah. Just out of curiosity.
That's a really interesting question. I guess it's who's got the most money.
Yeah.
Who makes the best bid? Hopefully we won't get into that. Hopefully we'll have that discussion before we decide who's going to make that offer.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, board members? Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and move. We do not have, for your review, a purchasing policy. Randy indicated that will be forthcoming. And so that's one we'll work on, obviously, but the statute within the Utah law for the RDA to operate it does provide some parameters in terms of both selling and purchasing properties. He'll govern some of that around that. But that hopefully will come to us next, and then we'll be able to review that before we ask the board members to consider approving that policy. The next one that's on that deals with reviewing the guidelines for a grant program. In our last meetings, we were asked to consider looking at grants, and there's a draft document that's been provided to you. Want to get your thoughts and comments about this grant program. So go ahead, Randy, let's talk about it.
So basically what we've done here is we've tried to look at what would be situations where we may be requested to grant funds. And as I've discussed, and I really want to thank both Andy and Matt, who were involved with me in preparing all these policies. As we discussed as a staff, we felt like perhaps the best and maybe only opportunity where we'd be looking at actually granting funds would, first of all, it would have to occur within a existing or future redevelopment project area. So that it needs to be in a project area. The second thing we felt was pretty important would be that there should be only really two situations in which an RDA would consider granting funds. The first would be if an outside agency, such as the state of Utah, the federal government, UDOT, which is a state agency, somebody like that, was going to implement a project within a redevelopment project area, and that required a effect or affected a business that had to relocate, then that would be a consideration that we would work with them. Now, in those instances, those agencies are required to pay relocation costs. So we believe that for the most part, most of those businesses that would be impacted would be receiving compensation from either a federal agency or the state of Utah. However, there might be an instance that even though they did get money, maybe they didn't get adequate amount of money, or maybe there was something that the relocation policy would not pay for that was very important for that business, and therefore they would have the right to come in and apply for those funds. The other option, and this could be something that could happen, is if the redevelopment agency itself approves a project, a development within that project area, and that development affected existing businesses, and those businesses were not getting funding from either the property owner or they're not getting funding from the developer, then that could be an option where we might consider granting funds to assist that business in relocating. So those are the two instances that this policy would apply to. Then what we've done is we thought about what would be an applicable amount or a fair amount. Again, with the businesses that would be impacted by outside agencies, they will receive money. So we felt like in that case, we wouldn't provide any more than up to, and that's one of the changes we want to make to the agreement, up to $7,500. For a business that might be impacted by the redevelopment agency's approval of a redevelopment project, then that maximum amount would be up to $15,000. And that would be used to help them cover the costs of relocating. And then that would also be applicable if the RDA were to ever buy any property that a business might be on, then we would be responsible to help them with relocation costs also. Now, we put in here that, first of all, the redevelopment board will approve any and all applications for grant funds in a regular meeting. So anything has to be brought back to the board for your approval. But then we've outlined some eligibility requirements, and it's the recommendation of the Economic Development Committee that the business would have to meet all of these requirements to qualify for grant funds. And we've outlined them for you. First of all, the business has to be in a adopted redevelopment project area. Second, the business receiving any funds must relocate that business in Royse City. If they're moving outside of the city, they do not qualify for any funding. The reason for relocation is because the business has or will be impacted by a project approved for funding and developed by a state or federal agency, or the business has been impacted by a redevelopment project approved by Royse City, and no other funding or assistance has been offered to that business. Now, I put that in there because of this. Our goal would be is if we're working with a developer and a developer wants to do a project, and that project's going to affect existing businesses, we'd want the developer to take care of that. We'd want that to be part of his responsibility. And we could negotiate with them that responsibility. But if we get into a situation where maybe I can't think of a reason where the developer may not, then we could do it. But obviously, we're going to get paid back for that cost. And the way we would do that is we take that out of any tax increment funding that he or she may qualify for. So at the end of the day, our first goal would be get the developer to do it. But if the developer can't do it or the developer can't cover everything, then we could look at that in our particular projects. The next thing that we've outlined in here that we want them, and one of the additions that has been suggested by the Economic Development Committee is if there is other funding available, the applicant has to apply for that funding first. And they have to demonstrate to us that they've applied for that funding first. Then what we're asking them to do is they then need to bring to the agency a list of all of the funding that they received and for all of the relocation expenses that was covered, and then provide us a list of what was not covered so we can consider whether or not those costs are acceptable to the board to pay for. The business will be required to give us a bid on or evidence to support the costs that they're asking for us to pay for. We would require the business to sign an affidavit that the funds were used only for the relocation of the business. If they'd use it for anything else, they'd be criminally liable for a misuse of public funds. And then we would also have a stipulation that the business has to agree that they have to remain in Roy City for a period of at least 3 years after we've granted the relocation funds. That assures that they didn't take our money and run, that they did open up a business, they did stay in business, and they need to do it for 3 years. Now, if a bankruptcy or something like that should occur and they go out of business, that's understandable. But this way, we know that they've got the money and they stayed within Roy for a period of time. And we think that amortizes out the $15,000 grant that, or $7,500 grant that they could receive. So that is basically what the policy does. We put a small application, attached that to it, and outlined how they have to submit it and what they have to provide to us. And then once we got the applications, we would bring that back to the RDA board for your approval. So that's what the policy is in a nutshell.
Go ahead, Diane.
Thank you. So in regards to the eligibility criteria under the third point, it talks about the business must be impacted by a redevelopment project approved by the Roy City RDA. Now, I understand that to mean that the RDA will be giving some incentive to that. Is that what that means? And if it does mean that, then does that mean someone, for example, say someone tears down a strip mall, but they don't request RDA funding or incentive? Does that mean that that business would not then be able to apply for this grant?
Your first question is that not all, we have the right to approve any development that occurs within our project area, whether or not they want funding.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to build something in there, we have the right to say, we would like to see what you're building. Now, we have better control and more authority if we are participating in that project with RDA funding, but we do have the right to review that. In the second portion, if somebody came in and was doing something that didn't need RDA funding, but was impacting a business, if it was done in an approved project, then we would be able to help with the relocation costs. Again, it has to be within a project area, and we like it to be an approved project, but in most cases, we would be, I could tell you the development we're talking about where there would be impact, they will be coming in and asking for RDA funding in most cases.
But even if not, the other businesses would still be able to apply.
They could still apply, and we could still consider their impact and help them stay within Roy. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, board members, other thoughts on this particular proposal?
Well, I know you said they had to stay in Roy for at least 3 years, but you don't have any, I mean, what if the owner died? Would they be get out of that? I mean, if they got the virus or?
Yeah, if you have a situation that's not, I think what we're trying to do there, and I'll get with Andy and maybe we can write that just a little bit more applicable to the fact what we're trying to avoid is somebody get the relocation funds and then get a better offer someplace else, right, and then decide to leave the city. We felt like a 3-year period of time would be enough to amortize those costs. But you are right. If they went bankrupt, or if their owner died and the lease was violated and they didn't want to lease anymore, they wanted to sell the property and they had to move, those certainly would be considerations where they would not have to pay the funding back.
Okay. Other ideas, comments? I'm sorry, Jan, you're on mute.
Is there a reason why they wouldn't have to pay it back if suppose they were to, the owner were to die and they, or, you know, if they're making money on the on the project, it seems like that would be one of their first obligations.
Well, I think what we're talking about is if the owner died and the new person came in, whoever got that property, decided they wanted to sell it, and that business was forced out because the lease was terminated, then that's an action that they didn't start. It's happened to them because the owner who owned that property died, and whoever the survivors are that have the property may say, we don't want to keep the property, we're going to sell it. And maybe that business lease would be terminated. Now they'd get compensation for that lease termination, but that would force them out, which was not an action that was due to them wanting to move or to leave. That's what our situation is for that, I think.
I have to think about that.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll get with Andy, and Andy and I might be able to come up with some different language to maybe address those issues where it's the leasee's it's not their action that causes them to leave. It's another outside action that caused them to leave.
Okay. Other thoughts? Okay, we'll go ahead and have that drafted up. And again, you'll have another shot at this before we basically are we go to a vote. We want to talk about the RDA amendments to the RDA bylaws. And so let's talk about that. I think you probably have seen some things on that. Go ahead, Randy, you want to talk about the bylaws?
Yeah, when we sent these out to you, if you'll notice when you got them, there were some bold sections in it. These are the sections that we're proposing to amend or add to the bylaws. We have bylaws, they were adopted in 2005. But the redevelopment code has changed over the years that our bylaws needed to be brought up to date to the new statute. For example, the redevelopment statute clearly states that the board will be the city council, but it also states that the executive director shall be the mayor. Our bylaws did not have an executive director and did not address the powers of the executive director and what the executive director does. So we made some changes to bring that up to code. So the bold sections are the sections that would be new and different than the existing bylaws. I'm happy to go over them, but let me hit the highlights. So first of all, as we've stated here, we now have the board is the governing board, and that's the city council. The mayor is the executive director. The city manager is the chief administrative officer. And we've outlined in here what the powers of the board are. And those are specifically outlined by statute, but we've also put in there, they're not limited to, but those are the ones outlined in the statute. Section 3, we outlined the executive director position and the powers of the executive director. Basically, the executive director is the chief executive officer of the agency. We then have made one small change here. So now what we've put in here is we've indicated that the mayor will be the chairperson also. So he conducts the meetings and he can make recommendations and covers the affairs of the agency. The vice chair will be elected from the board of directors. And the old one said it was the mayor pro tem. But we've now changed that to say you can elect amongst yourself who you'd like the vice chair to be. And that has a specific time when we would do that. That would happen at our annual meeting. And they would serve that position for 2 years or until a successor is elected and qualified. So we do allow the vice chair to be reelected for more than one successive term. So that's a change that we've added. We then go into section 6 where we outline the executive director and more in that role that they play. We have put in this that the chief administrative officer is the city manager who runs the day-to-day affairs of it, but he works under the direction of the chief executive officer. So that's something that we put in here, but he is in charge of the day-to-day operations, the budget, many of the things that he has already done. We did allow that the agency can hire additional personnel, and we specifically outlined 3 positions that the RDA has allowed for personnel. The first one is the secretary of the agency. That's the city recorder. And we then have allowed the legal counsel, which is the city attorney. And then we have the finance director, which is the manager service director. And so we've kept those positions, but we specifically outlined in the bylaws that you have those 3 staff members that serve with you. One thing we did allow is the legal counsel has the authority to retain or consult with any outside legal counsel who specializes in redevelopment law. So if Andy felt like there was something we were talking about and he wasn't very comfortable in providing a recommendation, he has the right to seek outside legal counsel that could help him with that. Basically, the city recorder, though, is our secretary, and your finance director is the finance director of the agency. And then we've kind of outlined what their duties would be. The meeting portion, while it's bold, there were some changes we made in there. The annual meeting will be the first meeting of each calendar year. So when we get to January, when we have our first meeting, that will be the annual meeting of the agency. That's where we elect the chair, vice chairperson. And that's also where we give probably an update of the activities that the RDA took under in the previous year. We do have the right to call any special meetings. We do have the right for a closed door meeting. And then we've kind of outlined, kept everything the same. We have to have at least 3 members to be a quorum. Everything else is pretty much the same, other than we did put a provision at the end that just says that notwithstanding in section 1, article 5 or 6, notwithstanding anything within these bylaws, the redevelopment agency Roy City acknowledges that the agency is a separate body, corporate and a political subdivision of the state of Utah and not a department of Roy City, and is controlled by the provisions outlined in the Community and Reinvestment Act, Title 17C. And those provisions would supersede any provisions outlined in these bylaws. That way, if the law changes in the future, whatever changes might be made that would affect the bylaws, they're automatically in place. We don't have to go through every year and change bylaws. So that's kind of what we've done with the changes to the bylaws.
Can I ask just one question on that? On the closed door meeting, are there parameters to that?
Yes, there are. We have the same provisions in the closed door that are in the state law. We require in there, we've said in here that we can have a closed door meeting. The agency may meet in closed door meeting upon approval of the board in an open meeting to discuss personal litigation and property acquisition. So we can't go into closed door meeting for anything that you couldn't do in your regular city council. And we have to approve that closed door meeting in an open meeting before we go in it.
Thank you.
Go
Now,
ahead,
Randy?
Brian.
just a comment. I didn't hear Randy mention it, but we also discussed in the committee meeting changing the bylaws so that in the event of a tie, the executive director, the mayor, would have a vote.
That is correct. Thanks for bringing that up, Brian. We do have in the bylaws now say the executive director shall not have a right to vote in agency meetings. That's what's currently in the bylaws. And it was suggested that perhaps you would want to consider adding to that except in a tie, except to break a tie vote of the board. Andy and I talked about that, and I'll just share with you what our reasons were. We felt that because the mayor now is the executive director of the agency, he now has more of an administrative role, and the voting is a legislative role. And we just felt like that perhaps that might be crossing over the powers of government. And that was the reason why we did not put it in there. There's nothing in the redevelopment statute that prohibits the executive director or the chair from having a vote. There's nothing that says in the law they can't have that vote. So it would be directed by the bylaws of the agency whether or not there would be a vote and in what circumstances there would be a vote. So that's basically your decision as a board. And I don't know if Andy has anything else he'd like to add to that, but that was our reason why we did not put it in.
Randy? I have a question in regards to section 6 under the executive director. The very bottom section where it talks about the executive director may appoint an acting executive director. Is that kind of like a corollary to mayor and pro tem mayor?
Yes.
Or, okay, so it's not someone outside of the RDA board. It would
No.
have to be within the RDA board.
No, it says, well, what we did say said such designee must be employed by the city. So it would have to be an employee of the city. The reason we put there in there, the law says this, the law says that the mayor shall be the executive director of the agency or his or her designee. So if the mayor decided that he did not want to continue as the executive director, he has the authority to appoint someone else to be that. But what we're saying is we don't want him to appoint somebody outside of the city. We want him to appoint an employee of the city. What has happened in most of those cases of cities that do that, the mayor has given that authority to the city manager. That's normally, if you see that happen, it's the city managers then given the duties of the executive director.
Okay. And
And
so
that's
it
why
could be
that's in
either
there.
way. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and the policy requires, Diane, that it has to be done at the review and consent
Right.
of the board. And so it's
Right.
not, I can pick anybody, it's just that you have to agree to it, okay?
So if
Yep.
he wanted to do that, he could say, this is who my designee is, and then you as a board would have to approve that designee
Or not, yeah.
or not approve that designee.
Yeah, the only thing on review and consent or advice and consent would be is you can't provide a substitute name. You can just either agree to it or don't agree to it.
Right.
And that's
Okay.
what you do.
Thank you.
Let me ask this question. Let's go back to the other question that was brought up. And I'm not being self-serving. I just want to make sure we have what you want. And I don't have a problem either way, whether or not you want the executive director to vote or not vote. The only time it will ever happen will be based on a tie. But do you want to basically not have the executive director vote? Or do you want, in that rare case, or do you want to basically give them the right to vote? And based on your input, it needs to be incorporated in this bylaw. Andy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, if I could comment on that. There is a problem if we don't have you with the ability to vote, and that's what do we do when there's a tie?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're not prevented from giving you that ability to vote, but that's my concern if we don't in the case of a tie.
So Andy, can I ask a question on that? So the
Sure.
only time there could be a tie would be if all of our members aren't present. Is that correct?
If you
And
had,
then
If
secondly, if there were not the ability to, I mean, if there were a tie and we didn't have that in our bylaws, then could it be tabled until there were?
Yeah, it would die. Yeah, it would die, and it couldn't be passed until, there was a majority vote.
Yeah.
In favor.
And that's perfectly acceptable, Jan. It might already say,
So
We don't
I'm not
So it's
trying
whatever
to
you
circumvent
prefer.
it. either.
yeah.
I don't have an issue on that, but.
right,
But I think to the point that Randy and Andy is suggesting, and it's a good point, the chief executive director basically is purely the administration, working with the city manager, the administration of what you decide. And that is exactly its purpose. So in essence, you could arguably say, well, let's keep this separation. Let's have an administrative side to this, and let's have the judicial side. And you decide, excuse me, not judicial, legislative side. And you keep the legislative side and keep it isolated. Or in those rare cases where there could very well be one of the board members not attend, you could allow the mayor, or in this case, the executor, to go ahead and vote. So it's really up to you, whatever you like, either way.
If I might, let me bring up one other thing. If you go to section 6, article 4, where it talks about quorum, we specifically stated the powers of the agency shall be invested in a board of directors of the agency. 3 members shall constitute quorum for the purpose of conducting its business and exercising its powers for all other purposes. Action may be taken by the board of directors upon a positive vote of at least 3 members. So I don't know if we would ever run into a situation where there'd be a tie, because we have to have at least 3 votes to move forward. Now,
Yeah,
we could have four,
Right.
and if there's a 2-2, then
That's
we
the
wouldn't
only
have this, we would be in
You
violation
wouldn't have the
of
3
that.
votes.
Yeah, we have to have 3 votes. So I think that's another reason why we didn't put the in there, is because based on our bylaws, you have to have 3 votes of the board to take any action to move forward on anything. And if
Okay.
you gave the mayor a tie, we would have to change that to at least 2 votes.
I think we leave it as is, the bylaws.
Yeah. Me too.
Okay. Okay, any other comments, question about the bylaws? Okay, there's really no reason why we can't then draft up the bylaws and have them for you so you can approve those. Perfect. Okay, one thing I do want to mention, I know Camille's still on here. In reference to the discussion on the grant program, just recognize it came out in the last meeting, but there will have to be a budget adjustment on the RDA budget to allow that to take place, because the budget adjustment will have to identify establishing then a grant program, and you'd have to allocate the amount of money you want into that. We talked about that last time. We didn't talk about it today, but just recognize when you do get a resolution that comes, it has to be 2 parts. One dealing with the approval of the grant program, as well as an approval of the budget adjustment, okay, that will go with that to make that fundable, for a better word, okay?
And in regards to that, does that mean that, we've talked about keeping some of the loan money available or transferring over? So I guess that amount would be decided later if we're going to completely eliminate it, or?
No, I think our recommendation would be we would take a portion of the loan money and transfer. Another option too is, again, for the most part, this could even be something that we may have 1 or 2 applications that might come in. So with that being said, though, it wouldn't really come in until we had an actual project. So it might be a future budget, but I think for the purpose of this now, since we're going to set up a grant fund, we'll probably recommend that some amount of money be transferred over for the fund.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we'll get with Andy and Camille and Matt and Andy and Camille, and we'll decide what the staff recommendation should be for that amount. And we'll have that ready for you when we bring back this for your approval, so that you would know what the amount is, and then we would have you formally set a public hearing for that budget amendment.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we got to review of an incentive policy. You had that one as well? Go ahead.
Chairman, members of the board, basically what I've outlined to you is I kind of gave you some of the, if you will, the general statements of the policy. There's still another part that needs to be put into this, and that is getting more in the detail of what would constitute us giving incentives and how that amount of incentives would be decided. And so there's more detail that needs to come in here. But what we wanted to do was give you at least an outline to see if you were as agreeable with some of the reasons for this. So the first part, the policy is we've kind of said that if we're going to give an incentive, it needs to meet some priorities of the redevelopment agency. It needs to be probably a project that we'd like to see in a specific location. If there's some place in the city that we think needs to be developed or improved, then that would be an area that we would encourage development, and we would look to incentivize. We want to make sure that it develops specific types of uses that would add value to the community. It might be something where we're trying to attract certain businesses. We want to make sure, and that's one of the things we've recommended here how to do it. We want to make sure that there is a return on the investment to the city. so that for every dollar we're getting, there's a return in a dollar coming back, or maybe $3 coming back. And then we want to make sure whoever we're giving incentives to will be community partners with us. There are many other objectives and things that a city might need, and it always helps if the individual can show that they're going to partner with us to help us promote other things that are important in the community. This policy will mostly focus on tax increment financing. I did outline that there are other types of incentives that can be used, but for this policy, this will be a tax increment incentive policy. There could be a possibility down the road where you may be approached by a developer to do a public infrastructure district. We'll come back and explain that to you in another meeting. That's a whole different process, but for this policy, it'll be a tax increment financing policy. We then kind of outlined maybe some guidelines that we would use for an incentive, that we would consider for incentives. First of all, we said, you know, we're going to only make sure if we're going to give an incentive, there needs to be public interest involved. And we've outlined what some of those public benefits would be. It strengthens the city employment and economic base, and it enhances other taxing entities' base. We want to show, if we're going to go ask for tax increment to the school district, the county, and others, that they get a return on investment too. Encourages quality development that meets the general plan or other planning documents adopted by the city. This gets into part of the long discussion we had on Chapter 13 and the ability to have a good project that meets your goals and objectives. It goes on and it talks about that we put in here, it will support our public schools from K to 12 education for future employment base. We want to, if there's opportunities for employment, we'd like to make sure those go to our residents, and particularly to those who are going to start a career. We've also outlined in here that that the public needs, that the investment needs to be protected. And so we put in here a couple of efforts that we need to make. We need to, our incentives will be post-performance, meaning that we're not going to provide seed money to projects. We're not going to upfront money. If we were to do any kind of upfront money, it would be secured through bonding, and it would only be to meet a public interest of the city. All of these tax increment projects will be post-performance, meaning the developer has to build what they said they're going to build before they get an incentive. Then the incentive comes. We want agreements will be required for any and all of our developments. We will do an economic benefit analysis for any project. That's the main document that will show the return on investment that will come to the city. And we will also review any and all things. We'll be like a bank. We'll review their pro forma. We'll review their investment. We'll look to see what the gap is, so that we're identifying that there is a gap and what that gap is, and that we're only participating in that gap. We've also outlined in here that we want transparency on our public financing incentives. So everything we do will be approved in a public meeting, and will come up before the board for that approval. We will look at the length and time will be based upon what the cost is to the city. One of the economic benefit analysis is we will review the project and we'll determine what the impact is on the city. Is there going to require a new fire truck? If the development requires a new fire truck, then we need to make sure there's going to be adequate money from that development so the city could buy that fire truck. Is it going to require more police officers? So we'll look at what the impacts are of the project on the city, and then we'll ensure that the city has adequate money for that. One of the things we've done on this is, I'll use the school district as an example. If we're doing a residential project, what we try to find out is, what does it cost Weaver School District to educate a child? And once we know that number, and if there's going to be a lot of children in a development, a residential development that's going to cause an impact, then we need to know that there's adequate money that'll be left over from whatever incentives given, that what's left over is adequate for the school district to take care of that new demand that would be upon them. So that's a similar type of thing we do, looking at the city in a similar way. Then we put an application review process. This will be beefed up. There'll be a lot more detail in these sections. But we've kind of outlined what they need to do to move forward with an application and the information that we would require and how we would go forward this. We'll use the Economic Development Committee to review first. They will then have a recommendation to the board. Then we'll come to the board and make the presentation to the board and make sure the board's got all the information that they need to make an affordable decision. So that's what this policy does. Again, we're going to adopt this by resolution. And there'll be some more detail in this resolution that kind of puts more specifics in this, particularly on the application process, how the increment percentages will be determined, and what else is required. So this is,
Randy?
Yes, please.
This is probably RDA 101, but I got to ask you a question. So are there assurances for once the incentives have terminated, then is there any assurance for how quickly a business can leave our city? Because my observation has been that often once those incentives terminate or die out, then the business leaves and we are left with a large blighted building or a large blighted development.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point here. And I believe the one thing that we will do is we will require that in our economic development agreements with these companies that they will need to stay in business or stay in the community for at least a specific period after the incentive has been paid to them. And in the event they were to leave, then that incentive would be prorated and paid back to us. Would we get all of it? Maybe not all of it, but we'd certainly get a portion of it to help offset that. So that will go in our economic development agreement. And I believe in the resolution, you'll see we have a provision that says any agreement will require a project to remain in business for a period of time after the incentive's paid.
Are these incentives used for just big projects, or are they for any size of a project?
Well, the tax increment, it would be generated. It could be any size of project, but remember, tax increment's property tax. So if you have a small business that's coming in and is only investing a couple of $100,000 in capital, that's usually not enough increment to participate with them. So for the tax, so that's why we have the revolving loan fund. The revolving loan fund is set to help a smaller type of development or business. And when we put the policy, we will actually have a minimum amount of capital investment that has to be made for us to consider moving forward with a tax increment incentive.
Okay.
Diane, you're on mute. Diane, go ahead.
Okay. In follow-up to Jan's question, so what defines a good community partner? Because, kind of what Jan was alluding to, we've had developers and property owners who, at least for timing wise, from my understanding, that, then they left the blighted area, so I don't know if that's just another addition to her question and comment. How do we fully define that? Is just remaining so many years sufficient? Because the things could have been done as a community partner to some of the areas of concern. It wasn't maybe really super business efficient for the property owner, but for the community it was really devastating. And as a good community partner, other things could have been done. So as part of that question, how do we define community partner? How do we put that part in here besides how long they stay after the increment funding is given?
Well, what I'm recommending is when we come back with that, again, every development that we give tax increment to will have an agreement. It'll be a required agreement. And we'll put in the agreement those types of things. We'll put in the agreement how long that the business needs to remain within the community after the incentives given. If we know that there's something in that area that would require the developer maybe to reach out and do for us, we would maybe encourage that type of thing. So I think that those will be individually negotiated as we go forward. Now, the thing about Roy is not, I mean, the last redevelopment project area that was created in Roy was in 1995 or 96. So we've not really used tax increment a lot. I mean, the tax increment I know was used is initially there was a project area created for the Marketplace Center. That was almost 40 years ago. There was a project area created for Iomega development. There was a project area committed where the old Albertsons was. And so again, what's happened if you look at those, well, the Marketplace still stayed there, but the original owners of that went bankrupt. And that declined significantly when they went bankrupt. So there's nothing we can do for a business that might go bankrupt. And they put it on the market and they sold it at 20 cents on the dollar and got another buyer to come in, but has never really put the money in, other than you got a great tenant there, Harmon's, who has made some significant improvements. Same thing with the Albertsons. I mean, the Albertsons existed until Albertsons decided they no longer were going to be Albertsons. And so that tenant left and left a vacant thing, which the landlord now's got. We've got the buffet in there, which is, and a couple of other things that have done fairly good there. But I think what we have to look at is we want them to be a partner because we want them to stay with the community. But there are also maybe some other things we might ask them to do. We might ask them to be a contributor to maybe a city cause. We might ask them to be a contributor to helping build a park outside of their area. Those are the types of things that I think of that you can approach developers about maybe participating on. If the city gets initiative and wants to put a program together and it needs some funding, then that's how you become a community partner. So those things will be looked upon as on a case-by-case basis as we go forward with whatever development they're asking for and what that percentage is.
Thanks.
Okay. Board members, any other questions associated with the incentive policy?
Nope.
Okay. Let me just cover a couple last things we've got, and then we got obviously a discussion we want to do on a proposed loan. It was brought up in a conversation that deals with what may happen if the UDOT organization starts the process of doing land acquisition sooner than we thought. Specifically, Matt and I should know sometime in May, after the Utah Transportation Commission meets and starts assessing the priorities and timelines of when they're going to do some type of development. Particularly, as you will know, House Bill 433 put some infrastructural funding to go ahead and do the I-15 interchange at 5600. We believe, and there's some evidence to support that will also include some element of 5600 widening. So as UDOT goes through that process, one of the chief issues going to be is you're going to have a bunch of people that's going to be impacted, some more than others. So the idea would it be advisable then to establish then a POC, a point of contact within the city, where both the residential people, the business owners can make contact with questions, and then that person be able to reach out to UDOT or reach out to the appropriate organizations and get some information. What's it going to do? When's it going to happen? There's a variety of things. And I share that with you only because if you were caught in that situation, if you were a business owner who's going to be impacted by a decision by UDOT, if you were a property owner, meaning a residential home, oftentimes they're told in the meetings, there simply says, hey, reach out to UDOT, reach out to somebody. But they could be unavailable, or there could be some missing information that could have been asked and could have been found and was not provided. I think the purposeness of this idea about establishing a POC was more about trying to make sure that these kinds of very disruptive events, that we can try to help move them along to keep people informed of what's taking place. Now, I'm not asking you at this moment to define who that is, but more about the principle of the idea. Would you be willing then to basically use the resources within Roy City to establish an individual who in fact, or individuals who would be in fact the conduit, so that our residents, our business owners, our property owners can make contact with to get answers to questions of what's going on in terms of these kind of developments that could be happening. Again, we'll know more after the Utah Transportation Commission basically makes some decisions. But if it comes, as it's very possibly we're thinking it could come, we could see land acquisition as early as next year. And there
Mayor,
will
can I
be,
make a comment on that?
please.
I think it would be really wise because it seems that we as council people get approached all the time. And we often give contradictory messages. So it'd be much easier and much more consistent if we were able to say our point of contact for that conversation. I'll have a conversation with you all day long, but our point of contact when you really want an answer is so-and-so. And we hire people to do that. It seems like if we've hired well, we ought to use them.
I agree with you.
Can I make a recommendation? I'll be involved in all the meetings with UDOT, obviously be in the know of everything. I would just recommend that I would be that point of contact, full-time staff member here, that I would like to take that on. It's going to be a high priority for the city for 5600 South to get developed. But I would also like the citizens to know that we're taking it, that it's a high priority for us. That going to me, I think that would be important.
Well, there's a good argument here because they're going to call somebody. And if we can basically say, here's the belly button to call, here's the phone number, and whether it be Morgan that catches that call, they go directly to the city manager. The intent here would be is somebody's going to find the answers and need to provide that answers. But equally important, that person needs to also make sure the council's aware of what's happening because you will be, as Jan suggested, be contacted. But if they have a belly button they can contact and work through to make sure they're getting the correct answer, or if the answers, we don't know the answers, we get those answers for them, it'll make any transition that we're being proposed here on our citizens much more smoother. I'm not saying they're going to like it, but I am saying is that they'll know it, and we owe it to them to make sure they know it.
I think the consistency is the key.
Right.
That they get a consistent answer, that they always get the same answer, that they're not getting multiple answers.
Yeah, right on.
It should be Matt.
Well, he's volunteered to take it, but I want to make sure all y'all are agreeable that we establish a POC. Are you okay with that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
I was going to nominate you, Mayor, but if Matt wants to do it, he can do it.
Well, Matt will tell you, and I can tell you, there's little things that Matt knows, but often everything that he knows, I know, and everything that I know, he knows. One thing about we made a commitment a long time ago would be is we hide nothing from each other. We make sure that we're aware of that because we have an obligation. There's 40,000 people in this city who is looking for directions and information, and we owe it to them to provide that, including you. And I know you may go up there and delete a lot of the emails I send you, okay? And I don't blame you, but you'll never be able to say that the mayor does not keep you informed. I send you a lot of information to help you to make sure you're wise and that you're responsive, because when the residents reach out, they're going to be asking you tough questions. You need to give them good answers. We need to continue doing
Right.
that.
And
Okay.
Matt works 8 to 5 for the city, so you're
That's
not
right.
there 8 to 5 every day.
I just think time commitment wise, that would be a wise assignment.
Okay,
Yeah.
then we'll push forward to it. I don't hear any rejections to it. We'll go ahead and keep you posted. One last thing, we do have an approval item. This is a proposed loan for the Bugs Off Car Wash located at 1885 West 4400 South.
Right by Del Taco.
That's right where it is. You're right. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about this one. Randy, I think you've got the particulars. I've seen your page.
Sure. Let me, the applicant for this is Brenda Nelson. She has purchased this car wash from a individual that owned it in Huntsman. She paid cash for this, did take a promissory note though for a portion of it that would be paid in 1 year. So there is no mortgage, no liens, no nothing on this, which means the collateral being pledged for her loan would be the car wash, and we would have first lien. So if there was ever default, anything happened, we could close on the loan, and we'd have a car wash that's valued at about $262,000. The property alone is worth, I think, about almost that 200 of that 262,000. So it's got good collateral. Basically, you got the address of what the business is. What the loan is for is to provide, to do some repairs to that. They want to paint the outside and the bays. They'd like to put up a new sign. They need to repair some asphalt. They want to get rid of the old vacuums, put in new, up-to-date, modern vacuums, and then they need to fix up the mechanical room. The total amount of the improvements is $69,000, of which she's requesting a $30,000 loan from the agency, and the remaining of that will be equity that will come out of her savings account to pay for that. The application met every one of our criteria. It's a great application. It was complete application. I didn't have to go back and ask for things. The project is financially feasible. The performance showed that her first couple of years, the money is maybe not significant, but it does cover the debt service. But as time goes on, that will increase to cover that. But she will also give us a personal guarantee that will cover the note that can come from out of other revenue that she has from other businesses. So the main things that we look at is, one, we look at, is the project feasible? And the answer is yes, it is feasible. We second look at, is there equity, so that it makes it difficult for an owner to go under when they have their own money involved in it. There's significant equity in this. She's putting up almost 57% of the cost of the remodeling. We're covering the other 43%. Is there good collateral? There is good collateral. We have a first lien on the property and the car wash, so we're protected almost 8 times the loan amount. It is going to improve an area. Yes, we believe it will. That is something that would help. Brenda's reason for purchasing it was because she didn't like the deteriorated that had gone on, and she wanted to see that improved. And she also thought that was a good investment in property. So it has met all of our requirements, and our recommendation to the Economic Development Committee today was to approve it. We cut off just before the committee got ready to make a motion. Our Zoom time ran out just as they're getting ready to do it. So I'll let the committee members speak towards that if they have anything. But the staff recommendation would be to fund the $30,000 at 3.5% interest for a term up to 5 years. The monthly payment on this would be $545.75.
I'm glad Glenn or Brenda would be a good business partner, because the city having a lien on a car wash might be sad.
I told Matt we got a place for him. If it ever goes under, he can wash all the police cars.
No, I think this meets multiple needs. It gets rid of some blight. Brenda has a current business that neighbors that property. She did well to update the building that she's in. She runs a good realtor business in the city, helps a lot of people find housing in the city, and has donated some time to the business advisory board. So I think it's a good fit.
She a good partner to our youth, Joe?
Yes, she is.
Other questions, comment, board members?
Sounds like a good deal. Sounds like the collateral and the money she's putting up for it, and she's got her business right next to it.
I think the collateral is a key.
Yeah, right.
Okay, then do I have a motion then to approve this particular loan?
I approve.
Okay, Joe Paul. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. And I'm going to roll call vote this one. Morgan, would you mind calling a roll call?
Board Member Paul,
Aye.
Board Member Burrell,
Aye.
Board Member Wilson,
Aye.
Board Member Jackson,
Aye.
Board Member Saxton.
Aye.
Motion
Okay.
carries.
We got the approval. Thank you so much. Okay, is there anything else, board members, you'd like to talk about before we do adjournment?
Nope.
Okay, we got a lot of things accomplished, got some good actions that we're working on. We appreciate your time. It's been a long day, but very helpful and very successful as I see it. So with that, board members, do I have a motion then to adjourn this RDA board meeting?
I motion we adjourn.
Okay, do I have
I'll
a second?
I'll
Jan,
second.
Jan, give me a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any disapprove? I don't hear any. Thank you. And Morgan, thank you for putting this all together, and Camille hanging with us. Randy, you did some great briefings, great information, sharing that. Thank you for so much for doing that. And we'll keep you posted on a few things that are unfolding in Roy. Again, I want to reiterate, please visit with Matt. There's some information that might be helpful to kind of get you some ideas of some things that's important to Roy City and you. Again, with that, thank you. Have a good day. We'll see you.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.